Hi friends, my name's Steven and this is my channel Signal Up Productions, where I make videos all about trains. In today's video I'm going to assemble this custom finishing models kit in HO scale and put it together and show you how we're going to do that in this video right now. But before we get started, if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing, and while you're at it, go ahead and click that bell icon so you're notified every time I post a new video. Now let's turn this into this and see how well we can make that into a really fantastic looking model. Let's get some glue going. I start out by carefully emptying the package onto my workbench, making sure not to let any of the small parts get lost. The included instructions were printed with pretty small font that made it really difficult to read. As this is a craftsman type kit, there are many steps to getting the kit assembled. There is an included photo of the finished model of what it's supposed to look like. However, it was printed on black and white on just regular copy paper, and so it wasn't really that useful. If you go to their website, there's a color photo of the kit, of the assembled kit, that makes it a little bit easier to see what it's supposed to look like, and you'll have a better idea of where those parts are supposed to go. You'll want to also search on the internet for some prototype photos or videos of these cranes. That'll help you in deciding how to run the cabling and any railroad specific details that might have been applied to the prototype that may not be included in the kit. I can't stress this enough. Study the instructions to the point that you just about have them completely memorized. Missing one small step early on in the build could cause you to have to disassemble the model later to get that missed part in there. You might want to consider getting some magnifying glasses to help see the print on the instructions. As I read through the directions, I locate and place each part on my cutting mat in the order that it's going to get used as per the instructions. Once all the parts have been identified, I start cleaning and filing the mold lines and flashing that was left over from the casting process. Some of the parts have molded on dimples to locate the spots where holes need to be drilled for the grab irons. Once the holes were drilled out, I used the included brass rod that's about a 15/1000 inch thickness to form two simple grab irons, which I then attached to the cab front and body left side. I used the next size up drill than what was recommended. This would give me a little more margin of error, some wiggle room. There were a couple of thick parts, like the larger pulleys, that would have been impossible to drill completely through with drill bits this size. I actually attempted it, and I broke one of the drill bits in the process. The cab front came out of the package slightly bent, so I gently bent it back to its proper angle, using the mating wall section as a guide. Once all the parts were cleaned, I used gel type super glue so that it would stay in place while I joined any two parts together. Following the instructions, I started with the main body floor and glued the operator seat in place. Then I installed the body left side, cab front, body right side, and the body rear to the cab floor in that order. I test fit the roof to ensure the walls all lined up. I glued the body front section between the body right side and cab left side, and then I glued the air tank to that section. Turning the roof upside down, I used tacky craft glue to attach the boom elevation assembly to the roof. This would give me the ability to adjust it slightly after the model was assembled, and I got the cabling attached to that. After the tacky glue had dried, I glued the roof to the assembled body. With the body assembled, I set it aside to let the super glue dry completely. Then I was able to turn my attention to the frame and the wheels. The wheels are cast on a sprue and needed to be thoroughly cleaned with a file. There are 4 small black plastic bushing inserts that go into the back side of each wheel. Glue these in place, then after the bushing is in the wheel, then drill out the end of the bushing with the number 66 drill bit. we're going to cut 2 pieces of the included 33/1000 inch thick brass rod. We want to cut these pieces to 3/4 of an inch long, and then file any burrs from the end of the brass rod that you cut. Insert the rod into the back side of each wheel to form an axle. Then use an NMRA wheel gauge to properly space the wheels and glue them in place. There's also 4 dimples on the journal frame ends where the brake beams are going to attach. Drill these holes and note the orientation of the brake beam before gluing it onto the frame. There's a slight angle on the pin of the brake beam as it goes into the journal end to match up with the angle of the journal frame. So make note of that in the instructions. Attach the frame sides and ends to the main frame, noting that the frame ends have a notch for the coupler pocket. The frame may need the pivot hole drilled out to accept the pivot pin that's on the bottom of the main body. Then turn the frame upside down. Place the wheel axles that you made earlier into the axle blocks that are molded onto the frame. Carefully glue the transmission and drive shaft casting onto the bearing blocks, making sure not to get any glue on the axles if you want your model to be able to roll. You'll note on the drive shaft casting that there's a flat side on the ends of those drive shafts, and they will sit down into the notch that's on the bearing block on the frame. Take a look at the instructions and any prototype photos to see the placement of the brake wheel and the Ajax casting. Glue that onto the frame where it would be appropriate. At this point, you can test fit the main body to the frame and glue some KD coupler boxes to the frame. Now let's turn our attention to the etched brass boom. These simply fold together to form a box. Take note of the bending lines to see that one side is partially etched through. Ensure that this side is facing in when bending the boom. I soldered all 4 of the boom edges just to give it some extra strength, but you could also just use super glue instead. Look closely at the instructions to see how the boom halves match together, and then solder or glue those together. Glue the boom end pulley and dragline pulley to the boom. The instructions show that you can drill through those and insert a brass rod to those, but I attempted that and that just didn't work for me, so I just glued them into place. Alright, we're ready to start painting now. For models like this, I just use cheap rattle can paint, some gray paint as a primer undercoat. Just be careful not to spray it on too thick so you don't get any blotchy runs or uneven surfaces. Once that was dry, I put the model in the paint booth and used the airbrush to apply some Reefer Yellow Model Flex acrylic paint. I made several light passes and just built up the layers slowly, allowing them to dry between each coat. Once I was satisfied with how the paint looked, I started the decaling work. For the decals, I just found some leftover microscale Union Pacific locomotive shields that were on an old decal sheet, and I put one on each side of the main body, referencing prototype photos as a guide. I also used some black stencil decals to add some numbers and letters, some safety labels, and then the kit included a couple of decals that said Burro on it, which is the brand name of the crane. And so I added those to the cab body, looking at reference photos to see where they should be located. To apply the decals, I just soaked them in clean water and then used microsol setting solution to help cure the decals to the model. Once that was done, I set that aside to dry thoroughly before moving on to the next step. I was now ready to try and add the cabling. This was a very difficult process, so we'll get into that now. The length of black thread that's included in the kit is used to simulate the steel cable used for lifting the boom and whatever attachment is attached to the end of the boom. All of the castings, all of the pulleys are solid castings, and therefore you can't really thread the cable through them in any way, with the exception of the pulley end that's on the end of the boom. I used some leftover brass rod to make a spacer to hold the separate pulleys apart, and then I was able to glue the cables to each of these, the ends of each of these pulleys, then glued the ends of those cables to the end of the boom. Then I was able to cut a length of a couple of smaller pieces of the cable to glue between the pulleys and the elevation pulley that's on the body roof. By doing this, that was enough to support the boom itself. After the glue had dried completely, I was able to run the cable from the boom end pulley to the main body front. I had to use some really small tweezers and steady hands to be able to wrap the cable around the cable drum that was located on the front of the body. I glued that in place and then ran the cable up through the boom end and out the other side. One area to make note, this kit does not come with any kind of attachments that go on the end of the cable, like a bucket or a magnet or any kind of hook or anything. So I had to dig through my junk box, and I found a bit of an old plastic sprue that looked like it could have passed for some rail tongs. So I just glued that in place, painted it rust. Hey, it works. Once all the cabling work was done on the boom, I got some black paint and just brush painted the pulleys and areas that I had glued, just a simple flat black paint. Once that was done, I put the model back in the paint booth and gave it a light coat of dull coat to seal the decals and give the finish, the model a more finished look. I then used some scissors to cut out the window glazing, making sure to cut right along the outside of the printed black rubber gasket. I used clear fingernail polish as the glue to glue that on because it dries clear and would stick equally well to the clear film and the metal body. I applied it with a toothpick so that I didn't get it everywhere. Finally, I used some Model Flex paint to add some level of weathering, some rust, some dirt, grime, to just different points around the body and the frame. And with that, this model is finished. It took me about 8 hours to build it over several nights, but it was fun, and now my HO scale crews can get to work maintaining my track. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next video.